Good evening and welcome to tonight's meeting of the Commonwealth Club of California. Find us at the internet on commonwealthclub.org. I'm Richard Thompson Ford, professor of law at Stanford University and author of The Race Card, How Bluffing About Bias Makes Race Relations Worse. It's my pleasure tonight to introduce Michael Eric Dyson, PhD, university professor at Georgetown University, and author of 16 books, or does this make it 17 books, including Making Malcolm and a biography of Malcolm X, Is Bill Cosby Right, or Has the Black Middle Class Lost Their Minds? And I May Not Get There With You, The True Martin Luther King Jr. If you ever overhear an incisive sentence that includes both, say, Tupac Shakur and Michel Foucault, you're probably in the same room with Professor Michael Eric Dyson. His resume alone would be impressive enough, but it doesn't begin to capture the career and the appeal of Professor Dyson. He has an uncanny talent for putting his finger on the pulse of American black culture, indeed American culture more generally, and perhaps they're converging and becoming close to the same thing these days, analyzing such pop cultural phenomenon as hip-hop, the enduring popularity of Malcolm X among black youth, and the controversial statements of Bill Cosby concerning the black underclass. He brings new depth and understanding to pop cultural concerns that are typically dismissed as fleeting curiosities by academic thinkers and sensationalized by the mainstream media. And he also skillfully cites challenging and difficult scholarly and literary influences such as Jean-Paul Sartre and Ralph Ellison. He is consistently passionate yet balanced, probing yet sympathetic. In a public discourse where the hatchet job is the norm, Professor Dyson deploys the scalpel and, when needed, the rapier. Where sarcasm and the put-down dominate, Dyson is earnest and compassionate. And as such, he's earned the praise of numerous newspapers and magazines, and figures as diverse as President Barack Obama, Professor Cornel West of Princeton University, author Naomi Wolf, musician Chuck D of Public Enemy, and Professor Noam Chomsky. Quite a group, and there are more. So we can look forward to an hour of deep and sophisticated conversation leavened by humor and common sense. Please welcome me and join me in welcoming Professor, Minister, and author Michael Eric Dyson.
Thank you so much, Professor Richard Thompson Ford, for that very generous and gracious introduction from such a brilliant and distinguished author and professor who has written provocatively and insightfully about race and helping us situate and contextualize the competing narratives that argue for and sometimes on behalf of questionable propositions and situates them in their appropriately critical context. So I'm appreciative of that very gracious and generous introduction, and I look forward to engaging the audience as well on these vital and interesting subjects that occupy the intellectual landscape in the present. Tonight I'm here to speak about my newest book, Can You Hear Me Now? Kind of a double entendre. Can you hear me now? Since I've said this stuff before and given it a new setting. And then can you hear me now in this putative age of Obama and what that might mean for those of us who write about issues of race and class and culture and sexual orientation and of region and of religion and the like. There are a variety of issues that I take up in the book, but for half an hour's talk, I'll focus on three. I'll speak about President Obama and his meaning and significance to us. I'll talk a bit about hip-hop culture, and I'll also speak about the vexing question of gender and perhaps sexual orientation. When I think about the extraordinary opportunity we have to live in this age of Obama, first of all, what is significant is that brains are back in Washington, D.C. The bright flight that was marked in the last 8 years with an exodus of intellectual credulity from the hallowed halls of government. And that is not an ideological claim, for as you shall shortly see, I take issue with all stripes of ideology and politics. But it is to suggest there was a self-conscious attempt by Mr. Rove, Karl Rove, the advisor to Mr. Bush, to engage in a deliberate act of rebellion against the pointy-headed intellectuals. Now, Mr. Bush, a graduate himself of Harvard and Yale, could no more deny or repudiate the bona fides of his intellectual pedigree than others who attained his station. And yet there was a conscious attempt on the part of Mr. Rove to distance Mr. Bush from the seriousness of the intellectual crowd and the pomposity of the chattering class, to suggest an everyman, hail fellow, well-met persona. You could have a beer with Mr. Bush was the mantra. And yet if you tried to have a beer with Mr. Bush, the Secret Service would certainly whisk you away. And before you got clear to the White House, you may be put down. So the point of all of that, of course, was to suggest that this was an everyday, ordinary man, and according to his own language, to misunderestimate him was a problem. Mr. Obama's rise has been hailed for its racial prospects, that for the first time in 44 presidents, number 44 is a man of African descent. That is true. Perhaps it is the fact that a community organizer is in the White House is as equally interesting and intriguing as his racial component. Also, the vivacity with which he embraces the life of the mind. There is a joie de vivre when it comes to Mr. Obama and his intellection, his engagement with the American prospect. One feels often that Thoreau or Emerson are taking notice of and advice and counsel from some of their fellow, if you will, interlocutors. One feels that Mr. Obama takes the life of the mind seriously as a constitutional law professor, as a man who understands the need to engage in rigorous criticism of prevailing forms of oppression and conceptions of the status quo in order to interrogate them, to ask questions of them, to engage them at such a serious level, and yet at the same time to wear his learning lightly, not to engage in pedantry, or as Walter Kaufman in the introduction to his book on Nietzsche talked about, obtuse pedantry. The ineradicable mark of an inferior mind with the attempt to, in one sense, delight one's audiences by appeals to arcana. Obama's on the ground with Wes Montgomery. He's got to be there. After all, the forces that are pushing up against him, the economy out of whack, and of course they would hand a brother a key to a sinking ship. Let's get the Negro to do it. Mr. Obama takes relish in that, of course. As an African American, it's good that we have a black president. I think at this particular point, Tupac said, brothers know how to make $1 out of 15 cents. He will certainly have to make much more out of far less. But what's interesting is that his temperament, his cool demeanor, never gives the lie to the authenticity that he embodies. And Professor Ford has written brilliantly about these questions of authenticity and how they've been couched in claims that have been challenged and subject to rebuff. What is interesting, of course, is that Mr. Obama himself understands the perilous plight of those who are vulnerable because of their minority status. He understands the hungers and drives that occupy the American scene and that really occupy the heart of those who have been pushed back against the wall, so that one takes out of context statements made by African Americans or Latinos. Think of, hopefully, the newest member of the Supreme Court, suggesting that she might have something as a Latina woman engaged in the rather sophisticated conversation that some white men might not have, and Rush Limbaugh goes on the warpath. What do you mean? It's reverse racism. It's the forward racism that I'm concerned about. What's interesting is that then, extracted out of its context, Professor Ford would have a much greater insight upon this as a distinguished professor of law, but extracted from their context, it seems to me that she's adhered pretty much to this strict constructivism, even as she has tried to talk about the Constitution as its own bellicose discussions. The Constitution didn't fall from the sky. It was generated of the context of the give and take as the Declaration of Independence, the America Magna Carta, the Bill of Rights, trying to articulate an American vision, an evolutionary process, an improvisatory method of grappling with the prevailing forces of oppression in America. So our founding fathers and our founding brothers and our founding mothers began to grapple with what it meant to be American. De Tocqueville came here and said, look, this is in process. This is not situated or solidly established. This thing is growing, a behemoth to be sure, not a brutality, but an opportunity to engage the American soul and psyche. And so taking out of context, looking like the woman is player hating on white men, that ain't the point. The point is that if you've been dominant, it's often been rendered universal and therefore invisible. Not seeing Mr. Limbaugh, that you and we want to continually assert that he is the head of the Republican Party. The titular head, Michael Steele, might have a problem with that. And what's interesting then, for me at least, is to understand the degree to which then the give and take, the bellicose nature, the raucous character, and I mean these in edifying senses, of the American scene where we argue about what's right. We don't assert it by fiat, speaking ex cathedra as the Pope of American politics. We got to make arguments that stand up to reason. Mr. Obama then brings a fresh breath of air to an American political discourse that has been riven by some of the most bitter ideological contestation in the last half century. And yet at the same time, he is forced into sometimes narrow considerations, pockets of reserve, and critical reflection when it comes to issues of race, class, and culture. Because obviously he doesn't want to be pitted and pointed and painted into a corner of being the black president. Ain't nobody gonna miss he's a brother. Right, just the way he walks down Air Force One. So. Right, when the Washington Post follows him to Ben's Chili Bowl, don't know if y'all know about Ben's Chili Bowl, to get a half smoke. And Mr. Obama gives the cashier some change, and she asks, does he want change in return? And he gives her money, and she asks, does he want change in return? He says, now the Washington Post says he said, no, we're straight. That ain't really what he said. And for San Francisco, I'm sure that sounds like an inadvertent declaration of sexual orientation. What he said was, nah, we straight. That's different. Right? Because in black vernacular, AAEV, the African American vernacular tradition, there are zero copulas. Copula is a form of the verb to be, not now we're straight, now we straight. Right? R is cut out. It's unnecessary. It ain't a dangling participle, but it's inessential. Right? And so, Mr. Obama signifies his blackness with plenitude. There is a fecundity and a fertility to his blackness that does not need to be cordoned off in quarters of authenticity. And yet, at the same time, there is a curious evasion of race by Mr. Obama at the same time. African American people must surely not expect more from Mr. Obama than any other president, but they should surely not expect less. So that when Mr. Holder, the first African American Attorney General, says in his speech, celebrating black history, that this is a nation of cowards, Mr. Obama, 2 weeks hence, a fortnight perhaps, suggests that this is not the way I would go about it. Cool, you the president, he the attorney general. Bad cop, good cop. Batman Robin, Scottie Pippen, Michael Jordan, LeBron James, Lamar Odom. And so, Mr. Obama, if you have taken the position that you cannot explicitly articulate issues of race because you will thereby be quartered off as the black president, you must then give way to those who feel a bit more comfortable to speak about issues of race. Not that one should agree a priori as to what the conclusion will be, but to take up the question is an American problem, not an African American problem. And if Mr. Obama doesn't quite get the fact that an American president must deal with the most pressing issue in America, if it is personally uncomfortable, it must be overcome as other areas of the presidency call out for. Mr. Obama, it seems to me, has made a very delicate balance in the past, speaking in Philadelphia, talking about the bitter incriminations of the past and the indictments of the American psyche and what they legitimately meant, but pushing past that bitterness, he suggests, to move into this new future in America. And yet, if we are not careful, we will not negotiate the perilous tensions of race. We will attempt to avoid them by pretending they no longer exist. And that is a difficulty that we cannot afford in this country as we make marvelous progress. We don't, as Professor Ford argues in his book, want to engage in bluffing about race, playing the race card, though we could say race is much deeper than a card, it's a condition. The metaphor itself gives way to an analysis of the prevailing function of race in America. On the one hand, we suggest that it is an invention of the American imagination, the anthropological estimation of the other, the ethnographic interrogation of the vulnerable minority, and yet it is also the material consequence of engaging in practices and behaviors that redound negatively or sometimes positively upon those who are the object of its inquiry. And so Mr. Obama is the mark for many of living in a post-racial world. What in the world does that even mean? Now, I don't know if Professor Ford will agree with this, I think post-race means post-black. We want to be done with it. Wash our hands of it. Get away from it. My God, didn't we do that like 20 years ago? We did the black thing. Now we're done. Post-racial, what does that mean? We want to get rid of Sarah Vaughan? Be post-Aretha Franklin? We could maybe be post Snoop Dogg, but I love Snoop. Falling back on that axe with a hellified gangster lean, getting funky on the mic like an old batch of collard greens. I don't even want to be post-Snoop. What does it mean to be post-racial? It doesn't mean to be post-white. White Americans have never been taught to think of themselves as a specific ethnic formation in the broader context of American ethnicity or race. So post-race is post-Latina, post-black, because blackness has been the disturbing, formidable presence of a negative that cannot be totally eradicated. And so we're uncomfortable with it. The president, I would add, too. And so how we negotiate race in an ostensibly post-racial world, I don't think we should be post-racial, but I think we should be post-racist. Getting beyond the bitter bigotries and the obscuring impediments that continue to block our ability to be fully American. That we should be post-racial. No, post-racist, yes. Beyond, see, I don't want to stop being a black man, and I don't know what else to major in right about now. I didn't declare my major 50 years ago. This be it right here. Now, we can be very circumspect and also much more sophisticated about what that blackness might mean, but I don't want to stop being black. I just want people to overcome their bigotry, their violent stereotypes about what it means to be black. And so I speak about that and a few other issues and discussing Mr. Obama's meteoric ascent and what it might mean for those of us who want to contend with the forces of racial oppression in America and the progress we have inevitably made. I also write about hip-hop culture, again in this book, because I think hip-hop is such a fascinating development in American pop culture over the last 30 years. Now, we know now there are about, 3 generations of hip-hoppers. An 18-year-old is not the same audience for hip-hop that even a 35-year-old is, or God forbid, a 45 or 50-year-old. I mean, Mick Jagger is still rock and roll, right? What is he, 75? Keith Richards, what is he, about 102? Doing his thing. They still rock and roll. Descendants of Chuck Berry, the greatest songwriter in rock and roll, bar none, right? Coffee-colored Cadillac. I mean, look at the evocation through the beautiful symmetry of metaphor and everyday existence that Mr. Berry was able to put forth, and yet he was never able to make money in the same fashion as the people he taught. And so here we are now in hip-hop's past golden age, already nostalgic about back in the day. I remember seeing my man Puffy, P. Diddy, Sean Combs. The nomenclature has been changed to protect the innocent. Yeah, back in the day, back when I was a child, back in 1989. Surely you jest. Eh? And so the nostalgia that has cluttered the arteries of remembrance for hip hop, now it's been calcified to some, subject to startling forms of interrogation by others. Startling, why? Because people say, I wish hip hop could be political. Wish it would take up more serious issues. Well, I was back there when it did, and there wasn't a whole bunch of support for Chuck D, for X-Clan. To the east, my brother, to the east. I mean, I was there. They were saying, shut the noise down. When he said Elvis was a hero to most, but he never meant to me straight up racist. The sucker was simple and plain, mother, and John Wayne. He since has said that Elvis was a good friend to some African Americans and had great music. He said, but I still give, shall we say, a finger to Mr. Wayne. It wasn't the first two or the last two. You figure it out for yourselves. And what's interesting is that that political expression within hip-hop was not embraced broadly or widely in mainstream culture, because political hip-hop at its best is an argument against certain presuppositions that stock the status quo. And so isn't it interesting and a bit disingenuous that now that hip-hop is past that political orientation, when it was engaged in the same way black music of the 1970s was engaged with politics, Marvin Gaye's 1971, What's Going On, but 1973, Let's Get It On. That's a little distance between those two. Rockets, Moonshot, Spend It on the Have-Nots. Make Me Want to Holler, Throw Up Both My Hands. 71, 73. I don't see nothing wrong with you. Getting it on with me. Giving yourself to me could never be wrong. If the Spirit moves you, let me groove you. The Holy Ghost is a co-conspirator with his erotic agenda. I'm just saying, I ain't making the news, I'm just reporting it. And so hip-hop at its height as a political formation was rarely taken seriously. And even some of the more interesting political figures now, the underground of an immortal technique, a black Peruvian young man of extraordinary intelligence and tremendous skill who barely is played on commercial radio because we hear the same old thing, not just in hip-hop, we hear it in everything. Britney Spears and Justin Timberlake. He really never apologized to Janet, so until he apologized to Janet, I can't give him that kind of love. I saw the Ciara video. He can go on television with Ciara and reenact certain sexualized movements and gestures, and Janet Jackson is barely even seen anymore, the object of a nipplegate that continues to reverberate. And so, isn't it interesting that in the American pop scene, hip-hop now has been reduced to so much commodity fetish with the bling. When the rim is in the system, ain't no telling when I love them, will I diss them? That's what they be yelling. I'm a pimp by blood, not relation. Y'all still chase them, I'll replace them. Biggie, repeated by Jay-Z, and then seen as the apologia pro vita blinga. Right? What the bling is, what the serious nature of the diamonds and the material and the so on. Yep, that is, in one sense, a summary of some of what's going on in hip-hop, the broads, the booze, the bling, the great trinity of hip-hop. But at its best still, there are expressions of, I think, edifying engagement with substantive issues that are obscured because young black men and Latino men, for the most part, are speaking on them and talking of them. So Jay-Z writes about Hurricane Katrina with poignancy. Nas devotes an entire album to interrogating the N-word. Jesse Jackson is critical of that album until he is caught using the word himself. He is a friend of mine and my leader. I said, don't give the word up because you know you can't do it. If you're going to use the word, be honest about it. Just say it's a context. Just say some people can use it and some people can't. And so I talk about these issues and engage them, and I think leading to the third subject here on which I want to end, I think hip-hop is an incredibly fertile popular culture ran, but it's also, of course, corrupted by the same forces that undermine and subvert radical potential in any group where the mass production of a cultural product robs it of its ability to rebel against the very culture in which it's produced. Then finally, of course, I deal with these issues of gender, sexual orientation. We see that the court has just ruled that gay marriages that are already on the books are good. The rest of them, no go. Now, it's always intrigued me that people of color have argued about marriage since the status of our marriages have always been in question. The legitimacy of black or Latino identity from the giddy-up, and Asian identity to be sure, or First Nation and indigenous people has always been, and I love like black people and people of color, don't be comparing that stuff. They chose to do that. We ain't got no choice. I feel you. But, you know, I think the mystery of sexuality is so deep and abiding. When did you choose to be heterosexual? 7 years old, you wrote up on your mama, look, I'm going to be needing a Corvette and a black book because I'm going to be macking the ladies. I need a decent basement so when they come down here, it's going to be looking good. I don't know when we chose that. I think we are, born into certain expectations, environments that produce and reproduce pathologies or possibilities. And maybe it's not that simple. And we know sexuality is a mystery anyway. We can't figure it out. It's along a continuum, to be sure, right? May not be quite where Gore Vidal says we are, everybody's bisexual. Wow. But maybe we just don't know. But the reality is that sex is such an interesting thing, and I think one of the reasons why people of color tend to be more hypersensitive about, and I'll end here, more hypersensitive about homosexuality is because our heterosexuality was already queered when we got here. Even our heterosexual performance was subject to white supremacist prisms and lenses. So now, if we're queered from the beginning, the last thing we want to see is come along another queerer sexuality. Look, tone that down. Keep that in the closet, as Michael Jackson ironically says. But when it's my man back when he was a black man. Love that brother. With apologies to Professor Ford. But what's interesting, I love him now even as an older white woman. He's an amazing guy. Now you're talking about a postmodern figure who has transcended boundaries. That's a Donna Haraway cyborgian element in Mr. Jackson. I'd love to go see his concerts in London. But what's interesting, it seems to me then, is that the queering of heterosexuality means that our sexuality makes us even closer to gay and lesbian, transgender, bisexual people because we are treated the same way. And as I end, sexuality has been so central to the American imagination of black people. Thomas Jefferson is writing in his own Notes on Virginia, skeptical about the critical capacity of reason to adjudicate completing claims about what's real. Black folk ain't got it, ain't got no abstract reasoning. But at night, loins trumped logic. Mr. Jefferson went out to the slave quarter, took some Luther Vandross tapes. What's my name, TJ, if you're nasty? Right, and you thought it started with R. Kelly. 14-year-old woman, ostensibly. He was dismissed, the case against him, he was found innocent, excuse me, not dismissed. So, allegedly. And you say, how dare you compare Thomas Jefferson to R. Kelly? You're right. Mr. Jefferson never wrote Step in the Name of Love. The problem is when we think about sexuality and identity and race, it's always a complicated amalgam of bigotry, of blindness, of real quests and hungers for the truth beneath the rubble of the social predicaments that we bring down on the vulnerable and the minority. And so sexual orientation is so critical as the issue of gender is. What do we do with, think about women in this generation, how women have been reduced more explicitly than ever before to cogs in the machinery of machismo, crotch extensions of desire of men, and not ceded legitimacy as autonomous agents of their moral destiny. And so the beauty of the culture in which we live is that we're able to at least to talk about and ask questions about what that means. We look across the Taliban, we look across the world, and we see what's going on with Muslim brothers and sisters, and we see the repudiation of the rights and gains of women. And yet right here in America, we practice so much repression of fundamental rights and possibilities for women at such a fundamental level that we would scarce believe that we have engaged in some of the most nefarious practices that refuse to cede the fundamental authority and legitimacy of female identity. That's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. I'd love to talk to you more about it. Thank you so very kindly.
Okay, our thanks to Professor Michael Eric Dyson for his comments today. We have a lot of questions, and the only thing that's going to save us is that Professor Dyson has already addressed some of them in his talk. You've kind of anticipated some of what the audience is going to say, but I'll start with a few that you haven't touched on. First, what do you think of the media's fascination with Michelle Obama? Can one draw any conclusions from this?
Yeah, she's a great woman. Even the Queen had to reach out and touch her. Right? They said Michelle Obama broke protocol. She didn't. She responded to broken protocol. The Queen initiated the move, and she just black churched her. That's how we do it. Oh, baby. The Queen said, oh, my God, can I just reach out and touch? Obama probably said, look, I feel the same way. Go ahead, you know. Michelle Obama is an extraordinary woman. Let's not forget, the mommification of Michelle Obama nullifies, not that I'm suggesting that the mommification of Michelle Obama is not critical. She calls herself mom-in-chief. But mommifying her, in one sense, rescues this narrative of the black woman as, you know, a reckless mother, the welfare queen. So she just juxtaposed to that, she's a superheroic figure. But her mama's in the crib, too. That's different. A lot of welfare so-called queens ain't got mama at the crib. And if mama is at the crib, she got other children, too. So what's interesting is that she's got help, number one. Number two, she's an extraordinary woman. But before she was mama, she was making the dough in the house before Obama. Don't get that twisted, right? She was making the most money, right? Before he became president. He's making a little bit more right now. And before he became a famous author, right? And then was able to pay off his student loans. You could have had the prospect of a president of the White House having student loans. I'm like, for real. That's like serious, right? Think about that. So, Michelle, I'm just saying, right? Michelle Obama is making mad loot, over $300K at the University of Chicago, Princeton graduate, right? I got to give the black commencement address at Princeton in a few days, thinking about Michelle Robinson. I got there in '85. She just left in '85. Tremendously intelligent woman, writing a thesis about maintaining her balance between a black middle class and their relationship to working class and working poor black people. She's a conscientious woman. They put her in the witness protection program when she made the comment that, look, this for the first time I'm proud. Now don't act like you don't know what she was talking about. You know? Oh, how dare she? How dare her not be proud of the fact that we enslaved her people? How dare her not be proud of the fact that Jim Crow law existed for a long time? How dare her not be proud of the fact that according to the Pulitzer Prize winning book, Slavery by Any Other Name, that we enslaved black people in America even after World War II? You know what she was saying. She was saying, look, for the first time, and if she ain't gonna say it, I'm gonna say it. I went out and learned the words of the national anthem. Okay, I knew them. But what I'm saying is that I went and learned the Pledge of Allegiance. I said, by Garnet, it's a good country. And when I'm at basketball games now and people I say, stand up! Oh, say, can you see? I'm singing that sucker now. Before I was like, what? Get the game on, bruh. Ain't got time for all that music. So the thing is, don't act like you don't understand why we would be pissed on July 4th. That's what, that's what Frederick Douglass said. What is July 4th to us? So the point is, I'm not saying collectively, black people have always been symbolically and substantively patriotic, but Michelle Obama got played in a negative way. I think she's an extraordinary woman, and I think when she becomes president, it's going to be a hell of a place up in there, brother. Don't let no black woman be president. You're talking about my kids, and what did you hold this for me? Right? Michelle Obama going to find bin Laden in the first week of her presidency.
You're listening to the Commonwealth Club of California radio program, and we're talking to Professor Michael Eric Dyson. I'm Richard Thompson Ford. Next question. Reverend Wright of Chicago is now on a bit of a tour. I actually heard that he was going to go on tour right before the election, but I think he pushed it back. I was a little worried about that. But the question, how do you view him? Should he be unleashed? That's in the question, not my words, or embraced?
Jeremiah Wright is a genius, number one. He's a rhetorical genius. He's an oratorical wizard. He is, for 37 years, held forth at Trinity United Church of Christ as one of the most powerful exemplars of African-American sacred rhetoric. Ebony Magazine twice did a poll of the 15 greatest black preachers in America, which meant the 15 greatest preachers in America. Okay. Joel Osteen, check out T.D. Jakes. That's all I want to say. On the second, my pastor happened to be Frederick Sampson in both numbers in the top 15. In fact, it is his phrase, audacity of hope, that found its way to Jeremiah Wright, that then found its way into the book of Mr. Obama. But Jeremiah Wright, on the second reckoning of the 15 greatest, was second only to Gardner Taylor. Gardner Taylor, one of the great preachers. God speaks out on eternity. God saves us, quoting P.T. Forsyth, not by flattering us, but by opposing us. Right? He's a great man, 90-something years old now. Jeremiah Wright was second. He evokes the African-American rituals, culturally speaking. He's got a hipness with popular culture. He sings songs in the pulpit with which he is quite familiar, shattering the boundary between sacred and secular. And he speaks uncomfortable truths in inconvenient times to audiences that are hungry for and desirous of that truth. Now, I know that many white brothers and sisters and non-African Americans go to church thinking, when they saw Jeremiah Wright, you can't reduce him to 36 seconds. His career is deeper than that. You can't judge a man by one swing at the bat. You got to look at the box score at the end of the game, and then you can't judge by one game. You could have struck out 4 games and still hit 55 home runs. Look at the season average. His average has been quite high as a figure in African American culture. If we knew the great preachers of African American life, they are treated as rock stars, but they are mostly unknown to white America. That's right. Jeremiah Wright, Gardner Taylor, Otis Moss in Cleveland, the old man. His son is now at Trinity. In the younger generation, Freddie Haynes, Frederick Douglass Haynes, Lance Watson. These are Freddie Haynes here from San Francisco. These are geniuses. These are men and women, Vashti McKenzie, Professor Knight, Carolyn Knight. These are people that command audiences of thousands to come hear them preach revivals and give sermons. And so the complexity of black rhetoric can't be reduced to a YouTube. If Martin Luther King Jr. were alive when YouTube was around, he would be equally subject to the venomous contempt of the public, as was Reverend Wright. I don't have enough time to answer that. Let me get right to the point. Jeremiah Wright said some stuff. What was controversial? What did he say? He said, white people who are rich run America. Right. That's not true. Look at the Wall Street. Bernie Madoff. Ain't many brothers up in there. Right? They didn't show them. Stanley O'Neill got out just in time. $200 million? Holla. How many black presidents? One. How many Fortune 500 CEOs? Not many. How many presidents of universities? Not a whole bunch. How many senators? Not many. How many congresspeople? We can name them. My point simply is this. Most people who have run America have been rich white men. That's not a controversial statement, except when it's called out and you don't really want to hear it. That doesn't mean most white men are running America. Most white men are in the same boat as we are. What? Can I tie my shoes? Can I make some money? Can my ATM work? And I'm trying to get a job. except we can pass it along in different ways. The route of transmission is quite more, if you will, smoother than it is for others. But that being the case, the point is that that's the point he was making. We didn't necessarily agree with him about the AIDS. Most black people say, well, it was created to hurt black people. How ridiculous is that? Some would say yes. The last person who was famous to suggest that was Bill Cosby in the early 90s. He said it was created to hurt people. So let me end by saying this. Jeremiah Wright made some controversial comments that were reduced to YouTube and taken out of context. And I think the problem is, of course, is that people think that he was the anti-Martin Luther King Jr. and Obama was Martin Luther King Jr. Jeremiah Wright is king from 65 on. Obama is king from the beginning until 64. At the end of his life, Martin Luther King Jr. said, most Americans are unconscious racists. Martin Luther King Jr. said, I don't know about you, but I think they might do us like they did the Native Americans and put us on Japanese brothers and sisters during World War II and put us on in a reservation, in a concentration camp. Martin Luther King Jr. had a sermon that he was going to preach the Sunday after he was murdered, and the title of that sermon was Why America May Go to Hell. So Jeremiah Wright is Martin Luther King Jr. on steroids at the last end of his career, and Obama has chosen the earlier one. Let me end by saying this. What is equally intriguing to me is not simply Reverend Jeremiah Wright's inability in the minds of many to evoke a, shall we say, conciliatory rhetoric or to adopt a language that would concede the legitimacy of the progress we've made. It is interesting to me that Obama found himself increasingly refusing to name Martin Luther King Jr. by name. First, he was Dr. King. Of course, he stole his rhetoric. He stole his style. Most of us who are black and in the pulpit do that, trying to get over Obama. Yes, we can. Yes, we can. You ripping off the man's rhetoric. First he was Dr. King, then he became Martin Luther King Jr., then he became a young preacher from Georgia. Slow down. What his name is. As Beyonce says, say my name. What, you with your other girls? You can't call me because I'm your girlfriend and you don't want to admit that you know me in public, Mr. Obama. Say my name. I think we need to hold him to account, not simply for the symbolic measure of what that means, but his dis-ease and uneasiness with what it means to embrace race, even as he has brilliantly led us beyond some of the paralyzing discourse that has trumped us in the past. There's a lot more to be said, but I'll write about that in my next book on Obama.
You're listening to the Commonwealth Club of California radio program. We're talking with Michael Eric Dyson. I'm Richard Thompson Ford. Next question, from the left to the right. What do you think of Michael Steele, both as a politician or a politico, that may say, and as an African American?
Well, look, Michael Steele's a real smart guy. I like the fact that two black men, head of their parties respectively, though one with greater power than the other, Mr. Obama and Mr. Steele, at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, and Obama's getting at him and said, or as Michael Steele would say, welcome to the Heezy. That was funny. That was a funny, Obama was on his game that night. Somebody's writing good stuff for him. Michael Steele is a friend of mine, as is Obama. I like him, actually. I think he's a smart guy. He doesn't show a lot of what he does that's smart in the way in which they've pigeonholed him in the Republican Party. First of all, the Republican Party is antediluvian. Antiquated. Some would say anachronistic, out of touch. And the right wing has captivated it. I mean, the Republican Party is better than that. Where are the Rockefeller Republicans? Bless you, sir. Where are the Republicans who have a sense of compassion for folk who ain't looking like them or who don't talk like them, whose last names don't end like them? There are some. I grew up next to a Republican in the hood. And when her husband died, she gave me the Harvard Classics. A black Republican actually gave me a new lease on my literary life 2 years before the Mass. Gray's Elegy in a Courtyard, full many a gem of purest ray serene, the dark unfathomed caves of ocean bare. Full many of flowers born to blush unseen and wasted sweetness on the desert air. I knew Gray's Elegy in a Courtyard because of this black Republican, so I appreciate the diversity of rhetoric and ideology. But I think Michael Steele represents something that's commonsensical. I would consider a Colin Powell Republican to be something that is almost out of order. In the Republican Party, they're trying to dog him. Dick Cheney, if that's the Republican Party, run. And so I think that Mr. Steele is in a very difficult situation. I think as an African American, look, his sister was married to Mike Tyson. He doesn't serve time. Oh, I'm sorry. And God bless Mr. Tyson on the loss of his daughter. That's tragic. Mike Tyson, one of the most brilliant fighters ever. Not only as a fighter, but as an intellectual. I know people think that's silly. Go see the film about him, but I haven't even seen that. I'm talking about what I've seen of him in terms of his analyses of fights and knowing 50 years ago what happened. I mean, it's just stunning and astonishing. So my point simply is this. Michael Steele is a wonderful black man who disagrees with a lot of black people ideologically, but he's not afraid of them. He comes around where black people are. A lot of Republicans don't even show up where Negroes be. Michael Steele is there. I just think he's caught in a terrible position. I think it's indefensible what he's trying to defend, and maybe he needs to come out the ideological closet and join us on the left side. Okay, maybe the moderate. Maybe he can become a moderate Democrat. Or maybe he can reform that party to such a degree that the big tent philosophy begins to prevail in a much more lucid and cogent and coherent fashion than heretofore has been the case. So I pray for him every night.
Thank you. Next question, kind of moving from the right back to the center, or a more ambiguous figure, but one you've written about quite eloquently. How relevant are Bill Cosby's criticisms of African Americans at this point of time? And I'll just add this. I wonder whether some of what Bill Cosby was saying reflected something like betrayal, rather than the more typical attitude of shame that someone that we often would associate with the attitude of middle-class blacks toward the underclass. He said that they weren't holding up their end of the bargain.
Right. No, that's a great point, Professor. That's a great point. You make a great point. And Professor Ford has written brilliantly about this, and I recommend you get his book. If you can't buy but one book tonight, buy his, and get mine on layaway. It's called The Race Car. It's a brilliant book. But let me tell you, you know, there is a sense of betrayal. Mr. Cosby talked about it. And in fact, he evoked the figure of Kenneth Clark. Dr. Kenneth Clark, who with his wife, Mamie Clark, wrote The Dark Ghetto and researched it, talked about it, did the Black Dial test. You remember that for the Brown versus Board of Education. And Dr. Cosby had been in conversation with Dr. Clark, evoked him as one of the great cloud of witnesses, symbolically, who had ringed the event that Mr. Cosby spoke at several years ago, 2004. So there's a sense of betrayal, honestly. There's not simply a sense of shame about which I've written extensively vis-a-vis Mr. Cosby and the black middle class. Yes, there is a sense of betrayal. They're not holding up their end of the bargain. But here's the point. Even with the notion of betrayal, the question that has to be raised, my Bible tells me to whom much is given, much is required. So I ain't mad at you making poor people responsible, because most poor people make other poor people responsible. You ain't seen nobody hard on poor people unless you talk to another poor person, right? Look at Chris Rock's Bring the Pain. And he says nobody hates a person who's on the dole, getting them over, than another poor person who's working their butt off. So please spare us the moral invention of responsibility in the ghetto. It's already there. The problem with Mr. Cosby, I think, vis-a-vis this narrative of betrayal, is that he ain't said a damn thing about the betrayal of the middle class, the folk with the dough. They ain't got it. Upper middle class, upper reaches and upper echelons of African-American culture, and the super rich. I mean, what responsibility? Now, we know black middle class cannot by itself pull the black underclass out of poverty. It can't, because they didn't put them there, so they can't pull them out. That's true. But there is a way in which we could use our bully pulpit to defend them more honorably and to acknowledge the difficulty of what they confront. And I think that Mr. Cosby was using his bully pulpit to remonstrate morally against the poor without offering them any capacity to respond, number one. And number two, he rigged his town hall meetings with people who agreed with him. I go do book signings, people disagree with me all the time. Step up to the plate, let's get at it. Right, let's talk about it, let's go back and forth. If you're serious about your beliefs and you're secure in them, have open conversations. And I think that, now I know he's not a cultural critic, he's a comic. He's a comic genius. As a cultural critic, I think he lacks the acumen and the timing and the cadence and the rhythm that he possesses. And the people with the pudding pop and the thing. He got that Samuel Clemens thing down. He's on Mark Twain at that level. He's a genius of extraordinary order. When it comes to social critique, he got lost in the jello. And I think that what we have to do is to help him understand that it's more complex than that. And by the way, how come Bill Cosby ain't been on no damn tour? Can we say that on the Commonwealth Club on radio? Bleep me out if not. Against rich people who couldn't balance their checkbooks any better than poor people in this recent crisis. When Hurricane Katrina hit, I was there with him. Me, Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson spoke, Mark Morial, head of the Urban League, spoke, and then Mr. Cosby spoke. And the rest of us were trying to say, let's allow these people to vote wherever they are. If they're in Houston, let's restore New Orleans. Mr. Cosby got up and he said, these people were poor and broke down before the storm. They were stabbing and killing each other, and I want to talk about what you were doing before that. I mean, man, that's harsh. That's a lack of empathy, a critical empathy that I think bespeaks part of the betrayal of the upper echelon of African American culture toward those who are poorer. And I do therefore think that the discourse of shame has to at least be evoked, especially in parallel to the black gentrified of a century before, where similar cacophony was unleashed on the poor and the heads of the working poor. So I think that Mr. Cosby ain't gave no speech about Bernie Madoff, who made off with all that dough. When the tsunami hit Katrina hit New Orleans and the Gulf Coast, there was all kind of hand-wringing. You need to lift yourself up by your bootstraps. Now we're bailing out notorious AIG, and we're firing the head of GM. Now, we said we didn't fire him, but come on. We forced him out. Now, I ain't mad for him, $20 million. Holla. The question is, a blue-collar company is forced to do for itself in a way that people with ostensibly billions of dollars of economic intelligence fail to do, and I don't hear a peep. They couldn't balance their checkbooks, but you expect Shaniqua and Rafiki and Shanae to be able to deal with what people with billions of dollars couldn't even do. Come on. Come on. That just ain't right. That just ain't right.
Thank you. Shifting gears a little bit, is Eminem co-opting hip-hop culture to white upper-class youth? Is he just a 21st century Elvis Presley?
Well, if it's a 20th century Elvis Presley, 21st century Elvis Presley, be a man of extraordinary talent. I mean, you know, a lot of us grew up before we knew racial politics. You ain't nothing but a no. Elvis, man, we was feeling Elvis, right? Thank you very much. Elvis, good looking, and could sing. He ain't Pat Boone. Read Peter Guralnick's 2-volume magisterial, arguably the greatest biography of an American musician written in at least the last 25 years, maybe ever. And you'll see the depth and the profundity, the complexity, the contradiction of what Elvis Presley was. And Guralnick, by the way, has written brilliantly about sweet soul music and Stax. I mean, he's a man of extraordinary talent, and about the blues. So Elvis was a gifted guy. So if Eminem is Elvis, he's a very gifted guy. But there's no denial. Well, you know, I remember reading, and I'm from Detroit. He's from a different part of Detroit, but he's from Detroit. I remember reading when Eminem came out and white people caught hold of him. This is the first rapper who uses literary pedigree to defend viewpoints that heretofore have not been defendable. And his extraordinary, well, Jay-Z's still alive, homie. Jay-Z is still alive. Nas is still alive. They don't even, Jay-Z? I mean, all my teachers couldn't reach me, and my mama couldn't beat me hard enough to match the pain of my pop not seeing me. So, with that disdain in my membrane, got on my pimp game, the world my defense came. Jay-Z? I mean, you know, with a complexity of expression, a Nas, it's only right that I was born to use mics, and the stuff that I write is even tougher than dice. I'm taking rapping to a new plateau through rap slow. My rhyming is a vitamin held without a capsule. Eminem is gifted. The cadence is slick, powerful, off kilter, like bebop was to swing music. But if you've never heard Jay-Z and different cadences that he deploys, I use this one because that one's going to get bit up. I use this one to change it up. I mean, he understands the shift, the new meter and cadence. Nobody in the history of hip-hop has ever mastered complex meter like Jay-Z, or like a Biggie, like a trumpet player, like Louis Armstrong. Some say the X makes the sex spectacular. Make me lick you from your back. It's a PG audience. I'm gonna leave it there. So look at that horn. Like Mos Def told me that Biggie was the mathematician of flow, right? I mean, this is the kind of beautiful tonality that's embodied. And so Eminem is great. He's one of the all-time greats, but he is not the greatest. And white America, of course, would warm up to a guy who looks like them. We got a black president. We feel the same way. We understand. Right? We understand. We get it. We get it. But you get mad at us. You're racist. We only had one brother, and I'm glad the 44th president is a brother, because I'm tired of 44 and black male being associated negatively. Usually it's kick in the door, wave in the 4-4. So now the 44th is a beautiful thing, because it's the president. So we get when people who look like us do stuff that other people do, that we now see the genius of it because folk who look like us do it. That's what Eminem is. Is he great? Yes. Is he a genius? Absolutely. Is he the greatest? Not by far. I mean, not by, you still got Rakim standing by the speaker. Suddenly I heard a fever. Was it me or either summer madness? Because I just can't stand around, so I get closer, and the closer I get, the better it sounds. My mind starts to activate, rhymes collaborate, because when I heard the beat, I just had to make something from the top of my head. So I fell into the groove of the wax, and I said, how can I move the crowd? First of all, ain't no mistakes allowed. If you want to see revelations, given an update, listen to Scarface on The Fix. I mean, listen to Tupac. Somebody wake me, I'm dreaming. I started as a seed, the semen. Swimming upstream, planted in the womb while screaming. On the top was my pops and my mama hollering stop from a single drop. This is what they got? Not to disrespect my people, but my papa was a loser. Only plan he had for mama was an abuser. And even as a seed, I could see his plan for me. Stranded on welfare, another broken family. So Eminem is a genius, but he ain't the greatest genius, and he's not the most influential rapper to live. He will be acknowledged as one of the all-time greats, and he said in one of his songs, if I was black, I'd sell half. He acknowledges that. I love him for that at least.
All right. Thank you. Next question, shifting gears a little bit to something relevant to very recent events. Proposition 8, as you know, was upheld by the California Supreme Court, and the questions I'm going to combine are these. The Advocate recently published a provocative article titled, Is Gay the New Black? I've heard this characterization made many times, and interestingly, recently by Glenn Lowry, but certainly by many in the gay community advancing the issue of same-sex marriage. The question is, what's your response to this characterization? And I'll just segue into the next one. Similar, I'm curious about when you first started to shift your thinking about homophobia, but then he goes on to say, or the question goes on to say, I'm assuming there was a first moment, perhaps you've always been down with this struggle, but could you share with us how you came to your progressive views on this civil rights issue?
Yeah, I understand the tensions on both sides. Black folks say, can we have something? Can we get something that's ours? Ain't nobody appropriating all the time. They took jazz. Can we keep the civil rights thing? Everybody ain't black. Now, here's the thing that I think a lot of black people miss, is that it's real flattery for people to try to compare themselves to black people. Hey, we want to be black. We're down like them. It's an insult to a lot of black people like, hey, it ain't the same thing, though, dog. So slow down with that. What's interesting to me, though, is that many African-American people forget that the civil rights movement itself was borrowed, right? Then pay some royalties to Mahatma Gandhi, because that's where King got it. So I'm sure the Indian people go like, you ripping us off, man. Like, that King stuff was sampled. Like, you like ripping us off. Like, we pay it to sing, not to bling. All right, so, excuse me, sing. And I ain't mad. I mean, the point is that it's always promiscuous. You're borrowing from a culture of opposition. Gandhi, South Africa, fighting. Gandhi, turning a nation around. King being inspired by what one biographer calls that little brown saint. Going to meet with Nehru in India. And then borrowing that in application to African-American culture. It's already borrowed. It ain't original. Now, what's original is what King did with it, right? Because King borrowed a whole bunch of stuff and a bunch of words. I don't want to get into that. He ripped it off, he stole it. Well, the person whose dissertation he sampled said, I regret that I have but one dissertation to give to Dr. King. I wish I had more things to offer to him. Because when he finished King Eyes in it, it was cold, right? When look, 50 years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. 50 years ago, great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today, signed the Emancipation Proclamation. Yes. This momentous decree came. Now, he didn't rip that off. I'm just using that as an example. Style is important. Black people think that black people have style over substance. No, style becomes a vehicle for substance. When Michael Jordan put the ball through his leg and around his head, he's still scoring 2 points. That's still substance. He still won 6 championships, player. So what's interesting is that when it comes to appropriation, black people are sensitive because we've been rarely able to own much, and so we feel proprietary over something that's already sampled. but we don't know the intellectual origins of it. We just know the existential and the moral claims that we make. I think that gay people do black people a favor. And first of all, what are we forgetting here? Some gay people happen to be black. Duh. It is not like they told them, oh, you're gay. You don't have to go to the back. Stay up front with us. Because you're looking awful delicious today. You go to the head of the bus. I don't make the news. I'm just reporting right here.
Oh, no.
They ain't got no exemption. James Baldwin spoke for black people as a black gay man. Barbara Smith now, Audre Lorde. Without Bayard Rustin, straight black people would never enjoy the rights they enjoy now. Adam Clayton Powell called Martin Luther King Jr. up and said, I'm going to tell a lie that you and Bayard Rustin are having an affair if you don't put him out, not because he's gay, but because he was opposing that black gay man, Lyndon Baines Johnson, before King was, and more bravely than Adam Clayton Powell. If that's gay, dig it. So I'm saying you some of the bravery, some of the courage, but some of the black people are gay and some of the gay people are black or Latino, gay-tino, Afro-American, I don't know, something, Asian brothers and sisters, gay, lesbian, transgender, bisexual. So the point is, y'all, that to appropriate the black experience is apropos because the black experience itself appropriated other models, paradigms, and instances of resistance. How I came to my own look, because of my homophobia, majorly. I'm born in a homophobic culture, taught to be suspicious and critical. I'm a Baptist preacher. What do you think? I remember I was a young preacher, 22, 23 years old. One of my great singers in my choir was pastoring his church for a year. He came to me. Somebody told a lie that he was gay, but then he found out he was because then somebody heard the lie and then they got together. And I'm like, wow, what am I going to do? Started thinking about it. I was like, dang, the dude can sing. Putting him out to church is not an option. Because them whack-ass heterosexuals cannot blow. I ain't seen no gay money turned down in the black church. We don't take gay money here. I ain't never seen it. The only funny money they don't want is change. So it's been a struggle. I struggle against my homophobia now, right? Defend gay people, I don't want to see it, right? I don't want to see that perform. People say, I don't want you to put it in my face. Well, you know, heterosexism is like whiteness. It's dominant, therefore it's rendered invisible. So we don't even pay attention to the codes that are enculturated in us, that are deeply inscribed in our subconscious that we take for granted as the myth of the given. That's what we start with. So gay and lesbian and transgender bisexual people are against that. And look, I pick up people in my family. You got people in your family. They're human beings. Are you telling me God just going to send them to hell for how they have sex? I mean, and people tell me, well, they're black people, there are books out there. Heather has 2 moms. I said, true, but, you know, I guess they could write a book, Shaniqua got 4 baby daddies. And I love Shaniqua. You saw how I defended him against Bill Cosby. You know how I'm rolling. But I'm saying let's be real about it. Did you see the report? Was it today, Professor, that 40% of babies born out of, I mean, is it higher than that? Born out of wedlock? Now, it's higher. But here's the difference now. It ain't just Shaniqua. So now it's Angelina Jolie. Oh, so it's cool. It's Maud. Madonna can go. I'm getting divorced, but I got a child. So it's cool now. But they demonize black and Latino women. Here we are bearing the bodies. That's why I can't forgive Justin Timberlake. Let's see say something. That nipple of, that renegade nipple of Janet Jackson's. They get ripped from its sheath, right? I knew the black nipple was powerful. I just didn't know the rest of America knew it. The aura and aureola. It's an amazing thing. So the point is, how then do we not speak? The reason black folk don't want to deal with homosexuality, because we can barely deal with heterosexuality, because America has shamed us. Because white America has been hypocritical. Psychosexual jealousy of black men. Right? Some of that hatred for those boys on the basketball court is about their sexual being. You're looking at those buff bodies. LeBron built like a god. Dwight Howard, impossible. And good looking too. Chocolate charming. Mad at them niggas. Right? Mad at them. Can't speak it. Well, I think it's nefarious. Right? And then we got all these concatenation of myths and stories that are projected onto the black body. the psychosexual jealousy, the fear, the castration complex, which is why it was so hurtful with Jesse Jackson vis-a-vis Barack Obama. And so, for me, because we have so much complicated configurations of sex around a heterosexual body, we can barely tolerate the homosexual because we've been so thoroughly demonized. But I would argue, therefore, we have to open up and become, I think, an example for the rest of America about how we can solve and heal some of that. So I try to confront the homophobia in me. What was Anton Chekhov said, that I'm born to be a slave, but I got to squeeze a bit of the slave out of me every day? I'm trying to squeeze that homophobia out of me. I still got it. So I confront it, deal with it. And I think that's very important.
Thank you. You're listening to the Commonwealth Club of California radio program. We're talking with Michael Eric Dyson. I'm Richard Thompson Ford. Next question, I'm going to combine two again. 50% of children in California are Latino, and the state as a whole will be majority Latino. What do you think this demographic change will mean for race politics, and what manifestations do you anticipate? And I'll just segue into, do you believe that to accomplish the goal of overcoming racism as a whole, we have to first address inter-ethnicity racism?
Mm-hmm. No, that's a great point. Yes, to the latter. And we got to address it on all sides. You hear in California, say in border states, Texas, California, especially, where we see massive amounts of Latinos and people from Central and North and South America, and from the Pacific Rim also. And it's a different world. It's a different reality. You have to confront a different mixed. And I think that we do have to confront some of the repulsive bigotry that's expressed from the senior partner in the law firm of minority status, black people. Right? We've been the senior partner. We've been used to that. Yeah, we're the big brother, hey, or big sister. And we've had some shameful beliefs about Latino people. We can't lie about that. We ain't been as sensitive as we should have been. We voted on some of them propositions that were funky, English only. Now, ain't that a trip? We talking about English only, and they telling us we can't speak English. As black people, right? Isn't that interesting? We're out here in Oakland, California. And in Oakland, right, with the school board decision about Ebonics, which I defended, which I think is important, now we turn around and saying, speak English. What to be you be speaking? Oh, okay. Why don't you learn it first? Now that's hard, but fair. And then on the other hand, we got to deal with the racism that many Latino people bring to America, smuggling it in with the immigrant status. Like when we see in Mexico about the black stamp. Because I look at the gradation of colors. Don't tell me it's about black, white, and then brown, because for real though, the demonization of dark-skinned Latinos is amazing. We can't even get the acknowledgement of the African origin of Latino communities, because we'd have to redo the demographics. Because a lot of Latinos got African origin, don't want to talk about it, but your nose is speaking. Your lips are hollering. Your behind is marching. I'm just Jenny from the block. But what I'm saying to you, I'm saying it's complex. And then we got diversities. Puerto Ricans up against Chicanas, right? Dominicans and Cubans. Ain't the same thing, right? Haitians even, for that matter, or Panamanians speaking Spanish with black skin. So when we talk about inter-ethnic racism, not simply between competing groups, but even within them, yes, because there's a hierarchy. Go to Brazil. Why? We have no racism here. Go to Cuba. I've been to both of them. We have no racism. Really, though? How come all the light-skinned people are up front? I ain't got nothing against light-skinned people. You see, I is one myself. But dadgum, what about the beautiful chocolate? Look at this professor over here. Handsome, articulate. He's married. Slow down. He got kids, unless you want to deal with that mortgage. He cannot holler at you. Brilliant does he want to be? Professor at Stanford. Chocolate man. This brother 50 years ago might not have got a shot in a lot of places in America, in our community. So, yes, we have to deal with that. And I think Latinos must be confronted with the African origins of their government, civilization, and culture. And black folk got to stop all this, take our country back. Slow down, homie. What does that mean? We got to safeten our borders. Now, I know that black people are in competition with Latino people for jobs, but don't be mad at a Latino who's willing to work for $2.50 an hour because he's trying to hustle. trying to pay us. But see, black folks should have to work. And I'm glad you shouldn't work for no $2.50. You shouldn't have to work. You done that already. So don't be mad at the Latino who has to do it. Be mad at the corporate structure and the government that permits the perpetuation of a legacy of inequality. That's the point, right? And so I think that what it means, too, is that we got to learn to get along. Rodney King said, can we get along? We got to get along. You look at your governor. You know? Y'all are diverse already in California. And I like some stuff about Arnold. I'm going to tell you the truth. I like Arnold at certain moments. You know what I'm saying? When he's lifting the weights in those films. Terminator's out. I love that brother. In many ways. He's been unusual, but still problematic, I'm sure. But the reality is, yes, we have to come to grips with what that means. 50%. And I'll tell you what. Many of the marriages that occurred, not the marriages, excuse me, but the father of children of African-American descent are increasing Latino. Right? That's an unspoken kind of thing that's going on, too. So there's already intermingling happening. The question is, how do we mimic it politically and then begin to articulate the politics upon which it should rest? And so I think at that level, we must all see the humanity of each other and learn to love and work together, because there are a lot more Latinos and a lot more black folk who are willing to work together than are given credit for, and we got to forge those connections. Now, we know certain gangs out here, especially up in South Central, in Los Angeles, in that area, with the Latino gangs trying to kill black people trying to kill Latino gangs, and it's vicious. Ultimately, what we have to do is see the legitimacy and humanity of the other, but we got to do it to ourselves first as well.
Unfortunately, we've reached the point in our program where there's only time for one more question. I'll pose that one and take my moderator's prerogative to add a little twist on it. The question is, can post-racial and post-racism coexist? And you've talked a little bit about post-racial already. Wonder about post-racism. A lot of people, we hear that a lot in the age of Obama, but at one point in your book, you said something provocative about postmodernism, that it's modernism in drag. Mm-hmm. And I wonder whether post-racism is racism in drag. In other words, it's taken on a new form, but hasn't quite gone away. Now we've got kind of subversive, slightly racist humor. You talked about Sarah Silverman in your book, who I also admire, but there's sometimes it makes me a little bit uncomfortable, I have to say. So just wondering about your thoughts on that.
That's a brilliant point. I'm going to cite you the first couple times on that. Then I'm going to take it over as I said it. No, that's that's a great point. And part of what I meant, of course, and I did say this earlier, and thank you, in my book, Not Here Today, about post-racism, is that the ingenuity of race is that it's adaptability. It's like a roach. You know, you feed it decon, you destroy it. Excuse me for appealing to my childhood. You kill the rodent, and then it begins to genetically encode itself, and it begins to eat the very thing you feed it. The poison becomes a delicacy. I've seen some resistant and recalcitrant rodents. So you're right in that sense, that the DNA of bigotry adapts itself. And post-racism can become racism in drag if it is deployed by enlightened figures who feel that now in a post-racist world, they're able to play with some of these stereotypes. Like you said, some of that is edifying and uplifting. Some of it slides into the same valley of woeful stereotypes that existed before. But let me give another example. Not Sarah Silverman. Look at a guy like Chris Rock, who I think is a brilliant comedian. And this is where I would challenge our president, who, when he was speaking before, y'all remember speaking about his campaign when he went to Chicago and spoke at Apostolic, the church, you know, where he talked about black fathers. And he was like, yo, why y'all mad at me? I'm just doing what Chris Rock, you know, it's like quoting Chris Rock. Well, no, Mr. President, because if you quote Chris Rock doesn't just jump on black people, he jumps on white people too, right? So what's interesting is that Mr. Obama has yet to challenge white America, and he's half white, so that means if he challenges white America, it's self-criticism. I was with a guy who said, look, we want to claim, he's a Republican in New York. He says, I want to claim Obama too. You know he's half white. I said, I hear you, brother. We can't even get a whole brother. I said, we can't even get a whole brother. We got to share this brother with everybody else. But if you want to share him, then that means he's got to be able to go to Pennsylvania and say some white people become bitter and get religion and guns when they don't have jobs. Oh my God, you're racist. Goes to a black church and says, you people don't take care of your kids, and he's hailed as a hero. So he can speak out against black people because he's perceived to be black, and therefore he takes certain license as an African American. But when he takes license as a half white man to speak against what he knows well about internal pathology within white culture, he's remonstrated and he backs up. But ain't nobody there to defend black people, defend white people. So yes, post-racism can be twisted, mangled, if you will, and perverted into a kind of racism and drag. I think what we have to do then is to constantly interrogate the boundaries, the parameters, and the content of what we mean by race. Because as James Baldwin said, you know, there's no such thing as having these new thoughts and breaking with the past without losing identity. Because Obama makes us uncomfortable, but so does Michelle Obama. Because we ain't never had a sister look like that in the White House. She's the shape of things to come. And not only that, she's a dark-skinned black woman, right? Despite what Iman said with that half-cocked comment, you know, she ain't that pretty, blah, blah, blah. She look at there. Look, a lot of people ain't classically beautiful and fine, right? Got a raw appeal. Hers is intelligence, Iman. She didn't get here, you know, telling a lie about how many she was saved from the bush and you really spoke 12 languages. So you're appealing to white supremacist mythology to perpetuate your modeling career, girl. Michelle Obama did it the hard way on the south side of Chicago. So she fine to me. And she's prettier than all of that because she is self-confident about what she and who she is and has fought against barriers outside the culture and from within. So yes, Professor Ford is absolutely right in terms of the slippery and slippery slope down which we begin to travel once we fail to make these distinctions and once we hold fast to them as if they are absolute. They are not apodictic. They are provisional. Because, as James Baldwin said, to get back to the comment, is that, you know, you lose identity. We lose who we are because it's a continuum. We began to rethink blackness. Obama has invited us to do that. It's a beautiful thing. But he also should invite us to rethink whiteness. And he should also invite us to think, if you can be critical of black folk, can you be critical of white folk? We know the answer is no. You can't be. Obama cannot be. Most black people give him a pass because of that. He can't speak out. We know it. I've fallen in whiteness and can't speak up. And white people get mad when, what does he mean? My damn it, my God, my Jiminy Christmas, what the hell are you talking about? And I'm telling you, you know what I'm talking about. The reality is, it's still in America in 2009. We are incapable of being honest. Minority people hear stuff they don't want to hear about themselves every day. That's what I mean by post-racist, too. We're not post-racist. It is the smuggling in of vitriolic viewpoints that slide precipitously into some of the same stereotypes that prevailed before, but now we call it politically correct. And why should we be politically correct? And political correctness is usually invoked by people who want to defend old-style bigotry with new-style terms. And I think at that level, it becomes complex and complicated. So yeah, I think that what we should do is learn the lessons of this particular era and grapple with them because a seismic change has occurred. Now, I'll end by saying this. See, Obama says he's part of the Joshua generation, right? Not the Moses generation. Moses, that's king and all them. Because really, anthropologically, Obama was absolutely wrong in his Philadelphia speech. He's tried to suggest that people who are bitter about race are from the past. Well, Oscar Grant is going on right here in the Bay Area. That was 2008. That wasn't like from the 1960s. Racial profiling, retail profiling. There's been enormous progress, but we can't quarantine bitterness to the past. We can't have it before and after the 60s. It's really not that neat, and Obama is usually much more sophisticated than that, but he was trying to defend himself against attack. That speech, as great as it was still calculated. It was Jeremy Benthamite. It was utilitarian calculus. It was used to defend himself. The speech by Holder was purely generated to generate conversation and to talk intelligently about these issues. So I think that Obama has to confront the very complex way in which he, as Joshua, he has to, what did the Bible say Joshua did? He sent the head of the tribes to go get the stones so we could remember how we got over. He is not absolved of the responsibility to teach America, not simply about a tall man with a big hat and a long beard from Illinois, but about a young preacher from Georgia, too. Both of them have produced the American possibility that we so eagerly and hopefully embrace.
Thank you very much. Our thanks to Michael Eric Dyson, PhD, University Professor of Sociology at Georgetown University, and author of 17 books, including the latest, Can You Hear Me Now? We also would like to thank our audiences here and on the radio, television, and internet. I'm Richard Thompson Ford, Professor of Law at Stanford, and now this meeting of the Commonwealth Club of California, celebrating more than a century of enlightened discussion, is adjourned.